Again, my name is Edwin Mayorga. I'm a student at the CUNY Graduate Center, and welcome to our screening and discussion of Whose Barrio. And really, we're focused on thinking about seeing inequality, but also trying to understand the past, present, and future of East Harlem. And so what I wanted to start with was just very brief, just little bios of our presenter speakers, and then we wanted to hear from Professor Vega, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A with our co-creator of Whose Barrio, Ed Morales. So let me just start by saying that Dr. Vega, excuse me one second, is artist, activist, and scholar. Her work has influenced, her influence is varied and global, providing a complementary but distinct way of seeing inequality and thinking about East Harlem. Born in New York, raised in East Harlem, Dr. Vega has been involved in a number of projects focused on culture, the arts, and community development. Her perspective is one that is firmly focused on examining and engaging notions of Afro-Latinidad, thinking through the African diaspora within the Latino Caribbean in particular. Rooting her work in the civil rights movement, it's led to creation of a variety of community-based organizations that are far too long to list, but quite astounding and impressive, but includes the Roundtable of Organizations of Color, Association of Hispanic Arts, the Global Afro-Latina and Caribbean Initiative, and her published books include The Altar of My Soul, The Living Traditions of Santeria, and Where the Spirits Dance Mambo, Growing Up Nuyorican in El Barrio. When the Spirits Dance Mambo is also the name of her documentary, which shot in Cuba focuses on the impact of Santeria on the civil society of the island. She's taught at various universities, including CUNY's Baruch College, as well as NYU's Tisch School. And she's the founder and director and president of the Caribbean Cultural Center of African Diaspora Institute. CCADI is currently working on an El Barrio project entitled Mi Querido Barrio, and hopefully we'll hear a little bit from Dr. Vega about that. So, Dr. Vega, would you like to say a few words or respond? So welcome.
What do you want me to respond to, the film?
The film?
I don't know what format you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally just starting maybe if you could say a little bit about your reaction to the film and then thinking about some of your work that you're doing right now with regards to El Barrio and its future.
Well, congratulations to Ed. It's absolutely a story that has to be told. And I think that one of the things that we forget is that, or at least let me take it back. I grew up on 102nd Street between 1st and 2nd. El Barrio was always a community, was always love. It was always people sharing. Our doors were open. And you can hear the spirit of our families through the music. You could hear the spirit of the young through their music. You could hear values and ethics being shared throughout the community because we grew up with those ethics. And if anything, my work is a reflection of those ethics, that aesthetic, that understanding. And I've been able to do the work that I have done because I grew up in El Barrio. So that El Barrio is a creative, familial, historical legacy that those of us who grew up during the period of the 40s and 50s carry with us and has influenced the work that we have done. And we have done the work that we have done because we grew up in El Barrio. I've never called El Barrio poor. I never said that we were unequal. Because I understood, because my family values were very clear, that we brought contribution and that those contributions had to be understood and valued. So my work hasn't been about inequality, it has been about equity. And there's a significant difference because when you look at equity, you understand your value. And therefore, your value is what then frames how you do the work that you do. The film is very powerful, absolutely. There's no question. But gentrification, I remember, was a word I heard when I was building one of my first institutions, with a group of others. And one of the community board members said that they were already planning for gentrification to be in full effect in East Harlem. So that the urban planners had already sketched out what El Barrio would look like 40 years forward. The problem is that unfortunately, we don't have access to information that helps determine how we organize and how we look at the future and what we do for the future, and then always react after the fact. So that absolutely the film is telling a story of El Barrio, but it's also telling a story of Brazil, of Colombia, where the areas that people of color have built as their legacy are being displaced. So our people are being displaced in Brazil, they're being displaced in Colombia, they're being displaced in Puerto Rico, in Loíza, and so on down the line. So that there is a global process in effect of removing people from lands that are valuable. And obviously, El Barrio is valuable. And because it is so valuable, the gentrification is in full effect. So what do we do about it? I think that we raise our voices. We do what Ed has done in telling the story. But let's be very clear, even the projects are not safe. I think that there was an article a couple of weeks back that the mayor has given permission for buildings in public housing that are privately owned to be built. So public housing, so-called public housing, is not protected, because now the mayor has said that you could build private garages or private buildings within public housing. Okay? So I didn't hear any reaction to that.
In the comments on the Daily News, there were some comments.
There has been no reaction to the fact that public property is being used in private ways. So that the issue becomes, and I guess the issue for the course becomes, how does a student become a voice with the knowledge base that they bring, if they have knowledge? And I teach a course similar at NYU. And I think that the issue becomes that students already are compromised, right? Because most of them have loans and most of them have visions and not living within the community that they're looking at, and can easily become the process of theorizing about a community or looking at the community as an other experience or as another project, and a project that ends when the course ends. So then I talk about, or I feel that that has to be examined. So that if we're really talking about how one makes a difference, can you make a difference in 5 months or 6 months? If you don't live in that community, if you don't have a vested interest in that community? Are you just as much of a voyeur as people moving into the area making investments? So I think the first question becomes, what is the deliverables in terms of the class and in terms of this discussion? What does one do that really develops a process that is going to have significant impact? And then how does one look at gentrification? I mean, a building that the center is going to develop, a firehouse on 125th Street, could also be looked at gentrification. I hope not, but it is. It's on 125th Street between Lexington and Park. The idea is to develop it and open a cultural center. But it will be impacting some of the vendors that are in the area because it will have a bookstore. So how will the vendors react? I've been talking to the vendors, but the fact remains that there's a shift. Is there a difference between someone of color gentrifying as a young man who has 7 generations of being Mexican and his perspective? any different than a developer's perspective? So I think that the conversation has to go further. It has to be analyzed in a way that really looks at the impact that whatever work is decided upon can have. The film remains. The film will remain as a piece that will raise the question. The issue is what action will it generate and with what long-term impact?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, my name is Caitlin Cahill, and I am one of the co-instructors of the course. I'm a professor at the Graduate Center, along with Wendy Luttrell, who's sitting over there in the audience. And it's my honor to introduce Felipe Luciano, who has led many lives on this planet, and that intertwine around the commitments to activism, creativity, politics, to revolutionary consciousness and social justice that has been nurtured here in the community where he grew up. And so, like many of the students here, Felipe was also a CUNY activist. I know him because one of my dear friends, Kyra, who's in the audience, her father and Felipe were part of the Last Poets, which, if you don't know, was a spoken word poetry form that prefigured hip-hop in the late 60s and the early 70s. Felipe has been a key member and force really within this community as part of the intellectual and artistic community of East Harlem. And he was one of the founders and chairperson of the Young Lords in the late 60s and early 70s, an organization that was committed to addressing, a youth organization that was committed to addressing structural inequalities in this community. He has gone on to be a founder and producer of the radio show Latin Roots. He's known as the first Puerto Rican anchor of a major network, winning an Emmy Award for his reporting. And this is just the least of it. He's really a change maker, a mover, a shaker in the community, someone who we all should be really grateful to and humbled by the profound ways that that you have transformed this community through the intersection of arts and activism and politics, and really with a strong, radical imagination that is buoyed by love and commitment to this place. So, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Caitlin. Do I?
Yeah, go.
I'd like us to, for a minute, remember that a nation that has no vision perishes. A people who have no memory extinguish themselves. We've often spoken about the 3-volume set, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, by a guy named Gibbons, who says that before a community, before a nation, before people are conquered, they usually implode from within. Just to give you a sense of the richness of this community, let me just mention a few names. And then we'll talk about structural inequality and what has happened and how we begin to move into the 21st century if we're serious about serving and inspiring. Tito Puente, born on 110th Street. Most of you know that. Eddie Palmieri and Charlie Palmieri, born on 112th Street. Machito lived, one of the greatest founders, originators of Afro-Cuban jazz, lived on 111th Street for years and years, for decades. The Manguals, Joe Mangual, we used to call him Buju, one of the great jazz bongo players, may not mean much to people who are not immersed in the music, But if the music is not preserved, if we don't understand why we should be proud, we fail ourselves. Manny Oquendo, one of the great percussionists, played with Puente, played with Rodriguez. Julio Andino, a great bass player, lived over here on 116th Street. Joe Cuba, Joe Bataan, Johnny Colon, Cheo Feliciano, Willie Bobo, the Berrios family, Victor Pantoja, Jimmy Sabatel. We don't have one plaque to any of those people on these streets, not one plaque. The old-timers talk about the Park Plaza, which used to be on 110th Street and Fifth Avenue, where we danced, where my mother met my father. She said it was one of the worst days of her life, but that's besides the point. They're both gone now. We had a Club Obrero. We had, there were so many places that you could dance. We had 3 movies. Think about what a vibrant community means. 3 movie houses. We had La Azteca, the Eagle. We had the Cosmo on 116th Street. We had the Ponce de Leon, which was a great restaurant. We had, now we only have 2 decent restaurants that are Puerto Rican. We don't even have a decent breakfast place in this joint. No bowling alley, no movie house. We have to go to 86th Street. Think about the deterioration. This was not just brought about by gentrification, but by the slow deterioration of a people's pride, of a people's empowerment, a people's sense of purpose. In the 50s, beloved, our mothers and fathers came here not to be in America, but to work. We sometimes forget that. We develop a severe cultural amnesia. We did not want to come here. We had to come here, as most immigrants have to. It was an economic necessity. My grandmother says that they had, most of the kids in her community had red hair and pouted and bellies that were sticking out. Those are the signs of malnutrition. Wasn't easy. We went to the textile mills. We did whatever we could. Puerto Rican women were known for their facility with lace and with detailed sewing. But the textile mills moved to the south, and then, because of the unionization, and then moved to Korea, moved to Indonesia, moved to Pakistan, moved anywhere else. So that the pride begins to lose its grip in a people. Structural inequality, there was none then, but the pride that we had. First of all, I am always amazed when people say Puerto Ricans had no work ethic. I grew up in this community. I was born in 1947. From 96th Street all the way to 125th, all the way on the number 6, men and women were on those trains packed to go to the garment district. How does pride deteriorate? How does a system slowly, cancerously, insidiously destroy a people? Well, the first thing they have to do is destroy the family. It's the first thing they have to do. And I remember the welfare investigator coming to my mother's house and saying, if you have a man in your house, you will not receive a subsidy. Puerto Rican couples who had been married 20, 30 years had to make a decision. I cannot continue to serve. And let me make this clear. Regardless of the gender wars that are going on in this city and in this country and in this world, because of the sexist way we've been brought up, men do feel that if they're not working, they are worth nothing. The spousal abuse, the child abuse, the self-destruction that ensues as a result of not having money destroys not only them, but destroys the community. So they left. It was supposed to be amicable. It never happened. What happens when you are alone and by yourself is you tend to build another family, which is exactly what happened. So we destroyed the family. All of this insidiously done. Wouldn't be so bad if we could hold on to our homes. And as my sister was talking about in terms of gentrification, folks, it didn't start on the Lower East Side. It didn't start in Williamsburg, both solid Puerto Rican communities. When we came here, we ended up in Williamsburg. That's where we landed because we were citizens. Other people went on to Ellis Island. My grandmother came here in 1920. So Los Sures, South Brooklyn, was a bastion, and there's still some strong Puerto Rican families there. But it was a bastion of Puerto Rican politics and culture. But they took, think about this. How is it that every community that has been totally politically and economically dominated has always, the first ones are always Puerto Rican? Let's look at the history. This is empirical research. Park Slope, total Puerto Rican community, fell. Williamsburg, fell. Chelsea, I don't know if you know it, it wasn't the gay lifestyle liberty, no, it was a Puerto Rican community. It fell. The Lower East Side fell. Folks, it has been systematic. And we can talk about our elected officials and our appointed officials till we get blue in the face. We've not developed the consciousness that we need to fight this movement. Other people do. There was a little Italian lady who fought against a major developer. What was his name? Robert Moses, who wanted to build, by the way, the Bronx is bifurcated because of him. When you look at the Bruckner and the Deegan, and it destroyed a community. This little Italian lady said, I don't think so. Homie, don't play that. Do you know that she stopped Robert Moses in his tracks because she had the commitment to do it? She had the dedication and the mission. And it didn't matter to her about the consequence. She said, you're not going to destroy the village. The village is intact today. We have lost slowly, and El Barrio is slowly going that way. And rather than get mad and talk about nostalgia, I'd like to talk about what we can do. By the way, the projects, 40% of our housing stock here is projects, low-income housing projects. There was a time when those projects, yes, were gangs. Most of the gangs in those days were not in the projects, by the way, they were in the tenements. And if you lived in the projects, you were considered a person on the hill. You were middle class. It was integrated.
You had a bathroom.
You had rats, we had roaches. But the rats could not enter. I can't say the same today. Today, just about in every housing project, there are abandoned apartments on each floor. I have been saying this for 35 years. The job of the United States government and the job of this city government, which is trying to make this a bistro. Bloomberg has tried to make this, and this, we should not just blame him. There's a whole host of people who've done this. Don't believe you become mayor because you have that much integrity. Do not believe that Obama got there because he is brilliant, and he is. Wall Street made it clear, we will give you $22 million a year, blood, but you better save Wall Street and say nothing about it. So when we get mad, let's remember what the politics of America is. The politics of America is about business. And so now we have a situation where we are on the hill, and so we ended up in this community not only dividing Puerto Rican against black and black against Puerto Rican, but Italian against Puerto Rican. And here was the killer. Do I have to stop? Okay. And here's the killer. When I asked the Sicilians what happened, they said, we weren't mad because you guys were looking at our women as we were looking at yours. We were mad because we had been here for 100 years and we weren't given the projects. The Italian Sicilians have been here since the 1890s and weren't given the opportunity. So this was a setup which ended up in countless numbers of deaths on these streets, countless numbers of incidents of racism on these streets. So when we discuss structural equality, we're going to have to look at the history. Folks, there should be no construction project in this community that comes in without 50 to 40, 45 to 50% of local residents operating in it. Anybody who lives here should join a CBO, a local CBO. We should just not allow people to just come in here and not do it. I have a building that I live in, and people just walk in, don't say, what? I have to literally stop them and say, I said hello to you. I said hello. ¿Tú me entiendes? If you're not Puerto Ricans, we have this, and Latinos have this incredible nobility of not confronting. When you don't confront the object of your fear, you become dominated by it. There are things we need to learn from other cultures. And that's one of the things that I would hope Latinos learn. No, nothing should be, we should be literally talking about how, and the church, and I'll finish with this, the church has to take a great part of, has a lot to do with this. Our elected officials have a lot to do with this. We let them off the hook too early. I'm sorry, we do. There is no other community in New York that allows their elected officials to do the kinds of things they do, and we say, ay bendito. Smack them. Put their feet to the fire. And finally, I think we need a coalition of ethnicity in this town, in this place. We have to stop thinking that this is, our community is dynamic. We've lost, a lot of people have gone to Florida. We have Dominicans, we have Africans, we have Chinese, we have Black American, we have Mexican. We need to start looking at ourselves as a coalition of opportunity. And we need to start talking to them about what we can do. Mexicans are as incensed as we are at what they see happening. And all you're concerned about is contra, tanto tacos. You're more mad at Dominicans than at the state. And you're making no sense. It's nation time.
All right.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks. So thanks, Felipe. Thank you, Dr. Vega. We wanted to give an opportunity first to Ed Morales, the filmmaker, and to everybody to ask questions. And maybe we could start with talking about the film. And I think you all did a beautiful job kind of connecting all of the dots of global restructuring and privatization and the public and culture and family and history and past and present and why this particular moment is so important. But so, yes, sir, first question.
Mm.
And this is outrageous. Like you said, we have to challenge people, okay? Yo llegué en este país, gracias. Yo llegué en este país en el 1954. Lo primero que el sistema trató de hacer conmigo fue que yo me avergonzara de mis raíces, de las costumbres de mis abuelos, del idioma de mis abuelos. Y yo, graduado de Brooklyn College, domino mejor el idioma de Shakespeare que el de Cervantes, pero siempre hablo de mi corazón, porque, bueno,
¿Cómo tú te llamas?
Ese es otro tema, pero lo que yo quiero decir es que, yes, we have to retar a todo el mundo, because we're constantly telling us that we need to stay in our place, and that's a lot of BS, okay? Y con eso yo estoy bien claro. Que Dios me le bendiga a todos.
Gracias.
Igual.
Do you want to?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just say a few words about the film. First of all, I want to dedicate tonight's screening to my father, who passed away last January 21st. And he was really the main reason with my mother that I have a strong connection to El Barrio, and he's pictured in the film. Also, Carmen Villegas, who was an activist here for many years, who appears towards the beginning of the film, also passed away last year, so I wanted to acknowledge that. You know, I mean, when I see the film, you know, I think, well, maybe it's a little bit outdated or, you know, kind of ends with the beginning of the recent recession. But you know, I still feel that so many of the issues are still alive, and I hope that you feel that way. You know, actually, I sent an email to Edwin the other day about a report that just came out by an organization called the what is it called? The Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development. You can find it in Gothamist, had a piece about it. And the report is called Real Affordability, and it shows how, it's an evaluation of the Bloomberg housing program, and it shows that the way, you know, one of the things that is in the film that is one of the most important things about the film to me, and also in terms of inequality is very important, is the way that the affordability of housing is determined by calculating this average mean income. And I don't know if you got it, because I've seen the thing like 50 times, and I still can't understand it sometimes. There's this part where they talk about the percentage of AMI that that can be adjusted in certain instances, and I hope that you notice that the average mean income is based on the tri-state area's average mean income, and that is closer to about $74,000 a year. And so, when you realize that the people in this community, and also many others like the Bronx, which is the next frontier, it usually hovers around between $20,000 and $25,000 a year. And the other thing that happened in the film too is that when I first started screening the film, and the developers came on and talked about the apartments being $200,000 a year for 2 bedrooms, many middle-class people that I know, and many of us maybe consider ourselves middle class, I guess, if we're here, they just kind of scoffed at the idea that people were complaining that 200,000, I want that apartment for $200,000. But it goes to show you like how terrible the problem of inequality is, because that really is an outrageous or unaffordable sum for the majority of people who live in this neighborhood and in many parts of the Bronx. So in some ways, the gentrification problem, and one of the reasons why this film is so intense for me, or if you're a student of the problem, is that the inequality that has gone so out of control that it creates these crazy scenarios. So yes, it's an honor to be here with Felipe Luciano and Dr. Moreno Vega. And you brought up the thing about the plan for building, market rate housing in parking lots. It's not only that it's on the property, it's on parking lots and also on baseball fields, that people use. It's gotten really, out of control, and it's actually going to be a very interesting scenario in the city 10 to 15 years from now, if this goes along like this, where people with a lot more money are going to be living next to people who are really, under the gun. And so I just wonder what's going to happen. But I look forward to your reactions to the film. I can just say briefly that the film I put it together when I was a Revson Fellow at Columbia, and Laura Rivera made the film with me, and she's not here. She's in law school right now, out of state, and it was a really strong collaboration. I want to make sure you understand that I'm not the only person involved in making the film. But what was I going to say about that? Well, I lost my train of thought about. Oh yes, so the thing about it was the first documentary I tried to make, and I first wanted to make it a verite film where there didn't need to be narration, and I was actually Councilwoman Mark Viverito who helped me find Jose, who was buying the condo, and then I'm sorry, Jose Rivera is the other guy who actually appears in a book by an anthropologist called Tenants of East Harlem, which you might want to check out. This is a long meditation on him. And James Garcia was someone who Melissa Mark Viverito met because he continued to come to the community board meetings and complain because he really thought that, because Corcoran Real Estate, which sold him the apartment, told him that it was definitely going to happen, that all the public housing was going to be converted into co-ops and condos. And so when that didn't happen, a few months after he moved in, he got some people in the building and started going to community board meetings and complaining about that. And so that's how I got to meet him. But both he and Jose became reluctant to cooperate with us about halfway through the process. And so that's why there's the rest of the the film is kind of tacked on like that. But I kind of was, I tried to be faithful to the story arc and everything, but I guess you're not film students, so maybe you're not that interested in that kind of. So sure, if someone has a question, you know, that'd be great.
Hi, my name's Vanessa. My question is about Jose and James. Can you give a reason as to why they didn't continue with the film? Was it that, were there certain issues? Perhaps they felt like, I don't know, like the direction of the film wasn't going the way they wanted it to, or?
Well, Jose didn't want to, he was reluctant from the beginning. And actually what happened was, because he was in that book, Tenets of East Harlem, there were a lot of students like you guys who were calling him and asking him for interviews and wanting to hang around with him. And he was actually getting tired, I mean, the way he expressed it to me, of all the attention. And I really wanted to, and my, my teachers, my teacher, June Cross, is like this amazing woman at Columbia University who you really should check out her work. She's really one of the early African-American women who got involved in making serious documentaries for, Bill Moyers and 60 Minutes. Anyway, she really wanted me to go into Jose's house, and get the feeling, and I really wanted to too, but he didn't really want it. He didn't want to, he said his wife objected, his family objected. As for James Garcia, I'm not really sure why. I mean, he just stopped returning my calls. And I hadn't shown him anything in the film. And I can tell you that he said things that were much more outrageous that actually wound up in the film. But yeah, I remember you, right? Didn't we meet once? Yeah. Yeah.
My name is David Calvert. I work at Youth Action Program in East Harlem. And I grew up in the neighborhood too, in Washington Projects. And I wanted to say, first of all, Jose Rivera works with me at Youth Action, so I can get him any messages you want. I want to say that I really love that piece about the neighborhood way back when, that Felipe mentioned and Dr. Vega. The neighborhood was a great place to grow up. I mean, fantastic. There were kids everywhere, and we played every day outside. And nobody stayed inside because our apartments were terrible. So we always went outside, and it was just the most incredible, great place to grow up. I mean, there were gangs that would walk around, but they were benign. They were like no trouble. It'd be like a group of kids walking by, and you made sure they didn't bother you. But it was just like, in my recollection, this is from 1953 through the 60s, it was a fantastic place to be a kid. And I just want to mention that because some people lose that. I think the 80s were brutal to the neighborhood. And, everything that we had worked for so hard started to fall apart with crack and AIDS and Reagan. And so, really those three just killed us, And so what I wanted to get to was the question of, in those days, we all thought that housing was the biggest issue. It was always housing, 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 housing. Every march was about housing. Every organizing was around housing. And that was because our apartments were so terrible. And we needed to build them. And there was abandoned buildings everywhere that we could renovate. But what I wanted to sort of get to now is, what are the issues now? Is housing the big issue now? I'm not sure it really is. It seems like the housing has all been built. And now the issue is building or regaining community that we really had 30, 40, 50 years ago, and making it a great place for kids to grow up again, and making it a place where whatever the race of the people walking around, and whatever the economic level or whatever it is, that they all can sort of somehow hang together, play together, whether they're Mexicanos, whether they're these new white people coming in, whatever they are, that that we can all dance salsa, and we can all have block parties, and we can sort of build that sense that we all had coming up as kids. If we can get to that, then we reclaim our neighborhood, and we build something that people don't want to leave from; they want to stay.
I worked with Father Gigante for about 2 to 3 years. And walking along Southern Boulevard one day, I mentioned Malcolm X, and I thought that he would recoil. And he said, "It's unfortunate that Puerto Ricans have not internalized Malcolm X." He said, land is everything. Land is power. Somehow we've lost what the founding fathers were talking about. We lost what the original system of slavery was built on. Folks, land gives you legitimacy. You have your own legitimacy, that is your validation with the spirit, but you also have to own something. And our problem here is twofold. I was talking to Caitlin, and I was discussing how mad I am at some of us for not having invested in our community. There are so many Puerto Ricans who were here who had the opportunity, but they left. They had held on to the property for God knows how long. And when people came over, whether it was drug money or not, I'm not going to get into the talk about that. They took it because they could not continue to operate. You give me $250,000 in a briefcase and say, "Quieto," I'm going for it. So they went to Puerto Rico, and some of them made it, and some of them didn't. Most of them didn't. But the housing stock began to slowly go down, And we have several people to blame. But Caitlin brought up the banks, who redlined the hell out of us. People who had money could not invest. They would not allow us to buy our own property. And I began to investigate some of the research. Caitlin, it's unbelievable. They just wouldn't do it. Today, the banks who were given trillions of dollars to bail them out are still not dispensing the funds that they're supposed to dispense because they say the economy is not right. Ergo, we see no reason to loan money to anybody to improve their existing stock and to expand their workforce. And so we are left to ourselves. The question for us has to be, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, how do we begin to generate revenue for ourselves? Apart from the illegal economy. And even with the illegal economy, I still get mad at some of our guys who made millions. Pues Felipe, tú sabes. If I take you on a Friday night in El Barrio from 100th Street to 125th Street, the first thing you're going to recognize is the death of a community. Nobody's outside. Not even the hustlers. And I'm an old street guy, so I know all the cats. Half my family was involved. And those of you who are not saying anything, you know exactly what the hell I'm talking about. So the community is dead. If I take you across, because we didn't invest in it, if I take you across on the bus to 125th Street, starting from Broadway all the way up, the Dominican community is like this, popping. People out on the street, women with their children, guys, they're selling whatever they can sell. That is, the honeymoon for them has not ended, Papa. They came in 65, it has not ended. I tell them, give it a little time. You're black enough. Wait till those lashes and those macanazos begin to kick your butt. I think you'll understand what we're talking about at that point. And they still haven't come to that realization yet. Still, their economic base is incredible. They took the money from the illegal, the Cubans did the same thing. We should not knock ourselves for not having done it. I don't know what we do. This theodicy that says, well, God only protects you, God protects you from evil. Folks, God works through man. And I don't understand how we still think that we're inferior because we don't have money. We are inferior because we don't have money. When we know that, and I'm not saying I'm not painting with a broad brush, but we know a lot of the money that went into buying all of these bodegas and all of these restaurants was drug money. Let's stop the nonsense. And the same thing happened to every other group that came through. And it happened in Washington Heights. They invested their money. We did not. I don't know if it's our colonialism. I don't know if it's the fact that we are so caught up in subsidies. The first thing you hear about when anybody talks about the independence of Puerto Rico, we don't want to end up like Santo Domingo. We don't want to end up like Cuba. And yet the manifestations of independence, the manifestations of self-esteem come out in the way you take care of business when you have no money. You work, you do what you got to do. We should have controlled the taxi cab industry in this city. We should have controlled it. We did not. We should have controlled every bodega in this city, at least in this area. We don't. And we have, and I'll end with this. I met a little Dominican lady. She had a 3-bedroom apartment up on Audubon Avenue. ¿Y doña cómo está? Aquí luchando, tú sabes cómo es. She had a curtain between, óyeme bien, she had a curtain between, in the room, a curtain. She had a hot plate on each partition. 1 bathroom. And she had, let me see, 3, 2, 4, 6. She had 6 guys living there, all of them paying $500 a month for rent. Okay? You understand what I'm saying? Her thing is, I've got to do what I've got to do. And forget about the legality of it. And she would tell them this, aquí no ven, don't come with your drugs, and don't bring your girl here. And they obeyed her. And these were some tough dudes. She made out like, forget about it. Let us take the lessons of people who are already showing us the way to go, entrepreneurship. And finally, George, what really knocks me out is if you walk on 3rd Avenue, or walk on, 3rd Avenue, and look at all of the abandoned buildings. They're painted so you think they're habitable. They're not. They're landlords who have done not a freaking thing with these buildings and are waiting to get some zoning codes so they can build high-rises. Why aren't we taking over those buildings? Take the lock, break the lock, go and say, ay, Felipe, tú con tu militancia siempre. You always want to be militant. Folks, Du Bois said there is nothing that's done. Frederick Douglass, you're going to gain nothing without struggle. Nothing. Your culture will die. Your politics, your children are dying. Because we're not standing up. That's my message.
Well, I think that we need to look at it with more intricacy. I think that within our communities, there has been incredible successes. And one of the issues that's not discussed is racism and discriminatory practices within our own community and the broader community. Because you look at almost any institution where Puerto Ricans have succeeded, if you want to use success in terms of economic terms, it's light skin. And the opportunity to move out of the community. So I think that we have to look at issues of racism, discriminatory practices. We also have to look at the fact of, and I have to argue with Felipe and the young man that spoke before about their apartments. Yeah, we lived in tenements. Yeah, the bathroom was in the kitchen. Yeah, the tub was in the kitchen. But the colors on those walls were Puerto Rico. The food on the table was Puerto Rico. We understood Puerto Rico and understood being Puerto Rican because those walls spoke about Puerto Rico. And everything that happened in that house spoke about Puerto Rico. That's where we got our values, and that's where we got our aesthetics. The process, if we're going to pinpoint it, starts in the 50s with heroin. Doesn't start with crack. You could almost pinpoint in the 60s when heroin comes into East Harlem and the doors close because our parents didn't understand heroin. They understood pot, but they didn't know heroin. And we lost our young men to heroin. And we have to understand that. And who brought heroin into the community? It wasn't us. That's when we started losing our young men. My mother would check my brother's arms when he fell asleep because she was afraid. And parents became afraid of their children because they didn't understand what was happening. Our building was owned by an Italian, and it was cleaned every day because there was a personal connection with the tenants and the people who owned the building. Milta and I grew up on 102nd. And you could walk down that street and not be afraid. But you had to be afraid when heroin hit. There were 2 and 3 locks on the door. That we survived is a miracle. That family survived is a miracle. That we had young men that became the young lords is a miracle, and you know it. So what happens to a community when it's bombarded? We didn't do it to ourselves. And you also have to look at the reality of Puerto Rico and its relationship to the United States. It's a colony, for God's sake. The oldest colony of the United States. And our people still live oppressed, there and here. And what does that do to a mind? What does that do to the ability to see yourself as independent and a free thinker? The argument and the discussion has to be more complex. And I refuse to blame the victim. And it concerns me, the words that are being used, because it's blaming the victim.
Thank you, Marta.
Note of information,
Oh.
Marta. No way I'm going to blame the victim. You know better than that. I wasn't coming from that, but I do say
I
this.
didn't like the words.
You may not like the words, but I wasn't coming from that as, I wasn't
you have to
coming,
use better
my
words.
spirit, maybe
Then
so.
you have to use better
But you know me,
words.
boy, you know me too long.
Well, you're
for
my
you even
brother,
think
but I
like
still
that.
say you have to
So,
check your words.
Understood, but you know my spirit.
You have to check your words.
Spirit is
I
what it's
can't
all
see
about.
spirit.
And you saw it when
They can't see spirit.
you saw it when I defended your institution, and I've always defended your institution.
Well, we don't
So
get
words-
personal now.
Words, well,
No,
you got
we don't get
personal with me.
personal now. We're talking to these young people, and you have to use the right words.
When you get
That's it.
personal, you have to be, you have.
You have to use the right words. That's
I
it.
gotta step up to you on
That's
that.
my brother, it's all right, continue.
Heroin, let me just say to the audience here, that the greatest gang leaders I saw from the Viceroys and the Dragons, who were remarkable people, and George, you're right, they would protect. They would. We had a wonderful time because they protected territory. Mothers were not hit, girls were not hit. It was a wonderful time to be around, and you're right. What the youth board did, and here's another structural unequal thing, Kate. What they did is when they saw, there used to be gang statistics in the New York Times. I don't know how many of you know this, but they used to count the number of casualties and fatalities in Brooklyn and in Manhattan. So what they used to do is they realized that they could not continue making money if these guys were going around fighting all of the time. So what they did is they made a plan, the youth board made a plan where they dumped a lot of money, and they took the leaders of the gangs, and each one of them was given a job. What happens when a ship is rudderless? It goes astray. And so you saw young men shooting up. First of all, do you understand what the trauma is coming from Puerto Rico to New York? Having a familial atmosphere, having where alcoholism is seen, but it's benign. It's not that you can't, you understand the understood. And somehow poverty is understood. It's not a badge of discouragement. No, the self-esteem is different. And then you come here and you're hit with a teacher who can't stand your guts, a cop who can't stand your guts. It was a horrible way to live. People medicated themselves. Yes, they did. And you saw these great warriors, and I mean great warriors, who would fight for 3 hours, suddenly nodding off. The crack era, Caitlin, am I going too long? Is that why you're going around? I get scared.
Sorry, Felipe, we only have a few more
Okay,
minutes, so.
one thing, folks, if you think heroin was bad, try crack. The reason crime went down in this city is because they reintroduced heroin. Crack was an antisocial drug, and the cops will tell you when heroin was reintroduced on these streets, crime dropped dramatically.
We had an,
I want to give an opportunity. There's a few people in the audience who've been waiting to ask questions.
Yes,
so-
hi. I don't want to keep on that point, but I did want to say that my grandfather came to East Harlem from Puerto Rico, and he invested in our community, and he was a bodeguero. And he got his grocery store with no drug money. And we actually lost that store and the building where we live when it was burned out, and we were forced to leave the neighborhood. So I want to say back then and today, the drugs and guns that are in this community are here by design. And like Marta said, we're not the ones who bring them in. But I wanted to get back to the film to say to Ed that unfortunately a lot of the murals that are in the film are like gone. They were knocked down to build, and even some of the smaller shops are gone, the Botanica. But also to say that we are still very much alive here in East Harlem. We're not dead. There are many of us still fighting. What we're also losing now is not just the housing, it's our public schools. Charter schools are taking over public school space by force. We're losing our public parks, they're being privatized. Our cultural institutions, we're losing Julia de Burgos Latino Cultural Center. The community space there has been closed for almost 2 years. There's lots to say about what's going on in Museo del Barrio. So we're slowly losing a lot of not just housing, but our different homes in this community, and it's by design, and it's not ay bendito that, there's nothing that we can do. We are fighting back. There are many of us who fight back. Thank you.
Hi, this question is for the filmmaker. I was born in the Bronx. My parents were born and raised in the Bronx. My grandparents came from Puerto Rico to the Bronx. And I feel like I can't live there even now. It's so hard. And I see that you now live in the Bronx. And I wonder if you feel that squeeze, that what next, what am I gonna do? Because watching this film made me so anxious because that's on my mind.
I'm lucky enough that I live in a space that's owned by some good friends of mine, so I don't feel, really pressured right now. But definitely, there's something coming in the Bronx. But I mean, it's going to be long term because, I think the Bronx resists gentrification because it's not that conveniently located, and there's there's such a deep-rooted generations of poverty and the housing stock is not like Brooklyn, for instance. Now, I know that Williamsburg and Bushwick belie that notion because Williamsburg and Bushwick have about the same kind of housing stock as the Bronx. But there's something about the facility. People migrate because of who they know. The whole thing about the Mexican immigration to New York is amazing because such a large percentage of the people are from Puebla, and it really was because some people came from Puebla, and then they talked to people in Puebla, and then they said, oh yeah, let's come here. And it's very unusual because if you go to the West, you don't have a whole city that's dominated by immigrants from Puebla. So it's a similar thing with Williamsburg. The L train, and it gets convenient, and then some people move from Williamsburg to Bushwick, and they say, oh, this is cool. So that kind of migration pattern holds for, and I don't see that migration pattern for the Bronx. Now, the interesting thing about the Bronx is that one of the things that I've looked at a lot is the artists as a leading edge for gentrification. And actually on Saturday, I hosted a panel about fashion moda, which was very interesting. It was this artist space that was in the Bronx where, it was white middle-class artists from the Midwest came to the Bronx, and then they interacted with kids. And it was a space where a lot of the early roots of hip-hop were developed, and it was very interesting. And so there's this whole rhetoric in the Bronx now that's trying to recreate that and sort of say, well, because there are some artists moving to the Bronx. And there's at least this attempt to instill in that scene this idea that the Bronx was great because when the artists came to the Bronx, they didn't just overrun it like in the Lower East Side or Williamsburg, and there's going to be the spirit of cooperation. So, I'm kind of tentatively joining, trying to join in this conversation and hoping that is part of it. But, the upward pressure on rents in the city is inevitable, and it's just outrageous anyway that people have to pay so much. The whole idea of, I really am just the type of person that questions the whole idea of real estate or buying house is the foundation of your life, because I really think that why do we have to put so much economic resources in just owning this piece of property and sweat and do all that just for that when we have all this energy that we could use for other things? We should be able to just have access to reasonably priced housing and then put our money into something else. I don't know. travel or education or something.
You're talking socialism,
Yeah,
brother.
well, that's what I always do, right?
I love you.
Yeah, I know you're hesitant, but you're gonna come out or what?
That is it.
Another question from the audience?
Yeah, I have a question, and I appreciate what everybody said and people's thoughts and sharing your experiences. I have a bit of concern because we're talking also about the future of El Barrio, and aside from gentrification, Ed, you've covered in what you're talking about and in the film, the idea of the Mexican immigration and how many Mexicans live in the neighborhood. And I feel that in panels and conversations, that seems to be displaced. And I would have liked somebody from the Mexican community to be on the panel, for example, and also talking about that concept of home, because a lot of the issues that you're talking about, I mean, they're claiming a certain space in the neighborhood as well. And the other part is also, Marina was saying, people are still fighting back. And it's true, a lot of people are still fighting back. And I'm wondering, not that I know, and maybe Marina, or other people on the panel, but young people are also, have been the force of the neighborhood for a long time, and not just young people who've been kind of in non-profitized, through these service organizations, but young people are also very central to different organizing efforts. And I'm just wondering, what you, all of you, have to say about this.
I think the one demographic that has been totally ignored in this community is youth. Totally. We had a gym on the Jefferson Projects. It produced a lot of champs. It was taken away. We have no gymnasium in New York with the exception of the Jefferson Community Center. Bally's still costs money. Now, we may say, because they have a recent sale, $10 a month, but you need $50 to join. Pent-up energy has to be channeled somewhere. I joined gangs because I had no family. I joined gangs because there was an anger in me that went beyond the pale. I joined gangs because I was ready to live and die for that enclave. We ended up killing somebody. I have no remorse for him because he messed with my family, and I'm still very Puerto Rican about that. Once you mess with my family, you cross the Rubicon, it's wraps, lights out. But be that as it may, I went to jail, and I came back, and I realized what the anger was. It took me a long time. Those kids that you see in the East Rivers, the Tafts, the Lehmans, the Washingtons, the East River, the Johnsons, those kids are looking for someone, I'm working with some kids, to actually talk with them, not at them, talk with them. We look at them with their pants, we look at them and we forget. We get cultural, and we forget how we used to dress. To our parents, we were insane. They are going through their changes. They have their dreadlocks, they have their whatever it is. They do their reggaeton, drives me crazy. But you want to know something? It's their form. And I think if we don't include them in everything we do, and I agree with you that Mexicans should have been involved, along with Dominicans, Africans, Italians, and everyone else who's in this community. We have a huge Asian population. No one's saying anything about that. We have a huge gay population. No one's saying anything about that. And so my contention is that anything you do in the 21st century in this community, at the risk of going extinct, and by the way, when shit hits the fan in this community, it's going to be youth who are going to be doing the fighting. Very few people who say they're here, estamos aquí. I have seen this before. I saw it in the 60s. Institutions that were supposed to represent us that did not. It was their own delusion. We're doing well, they would say, as we were sinking. And I don't mean to get on the sister who's saying that we're doing. I'm pretty sure she's doing her best. If we don't begin to build a political action committee that is serious about confronting power, my sister, we're not going to have a community. My dream was, I had a dream that I was crying when I woke up, that I came to a kiosk, and there was a blonde-haired lady who was saying, oh, here's a pamphlet. There used to be Puerto Ricans here. They lived right over here. And she was giving me on a noble, beautiful people called Puerto Ricans who went extinct. Don't think it can't happen to you. Look at the Hawaiians.
So I think we actually are out of time and have to wrap up. So I do want to thank all of our presenters, Felipe Luciano, Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, and Ed Morales. Conversation will also continue on Twitter, so INQ13. Definitely check that hashtag out and continue to be part of that conversation. But thank you everyone who's come out tonight, and be on the lookout for a few more events here in El Barrio related to this course.
Also, this is a free participatory online open course, inq13.gc.cuny.edu, and we have a really active blog, a public dialogue that we would love everyone to participate in, and so come join us. Thank you, and we can continue the conversation outside this room as well. So thank you, everybody.
Too short, too short.